I would say I initially started to understand it at Yahoo, like towards the end of my time at Yahoo. And that was part of why I moved out of analytics and wanted to get into like business partnership, because that's where you're really talking to the business and trying to understand the individuals who are in charge of driving change and how to relate to them. And it solidified and became even more clear to me when I started managing people directly. So as opposed to being like a matrix manager who's like, I'm in charge of these projects, to being like, I'm in charge of this team of people and the team is growing, there it became clear that a lot of things became clear. One, that people don't really care how smart you are. Like that's not the wavelength that we're working at here in organizations. I think that that's something that's so critical in academia, and it may even be critical in analytics, but in the broader world of business, there are tons of smart people and nobody really cares about that. There are also tons of people who are not so smart, but who are still able to drive change. And those people are going to be more effective and more likely to move forward. And so that realization became clear to me as I progressed as a manager. And I would say, too, my own sense of insecurity became more clear. So like when I told you guys the story about why I started in psychology, like I didn't know that at the time, that that's why I was so into psychology, was that I wanted to feel like I could fit in. Like that's something that I came to realize after years of doing work with therapists and coaches to try and understand why I was so into this space. And, you know, I think a lot of people who go into leadership are trying to fill some kind of gap or empty space within themselves. Like, I want people to like me. I want to feel accomplished. I'm going into leadership to get those gaps filled. And then they become leaders and they're still looking to fill that gap. And the void just grows and it becomes a harder and harder thing because they're not able to connect with the folks who are supposed to be leaning on them because they have to do this inner work that they haven't done. So it's a long way of saying I learned through failing at being a leader at Yahoo and to some extent at Patreon to me. So when I was at Patreon, I had a coach that I was working with because the team I was leading was expanding, the company was expanding, and I knew that I needed help. I had a lot of ideas as to how the organization could run effectively, and I could map that all out and describe all of that. But developing these deep connections with the team, which is necessary to get the buy-in on the change, was something that was difficult for me. And it was clear that that was going on the recruiting team in particular. We had teammates who were there when I joined. Some of them had to be turned over, and we're kind of starting from scratch. So I built the recruiting team from the first hire on, given that sense and that process of turnover. And so I could tell that I could make it work with folks who I can bring on, but I couldn't make it work with folks who are already there. And so I wanted to be able to connect with and communicate with everyone, not just people who are super analytical and organized and detail oriented in the way that I function, but like who can see the world in different ways and still work well with my particular design and framework. And so I worked with a coach, and with the coach, what we tried to dig down into is what my biggest fear was and how that fear that I had was manifesting in the way that I worked with teams. And later on, I've come to realize how I work with everyone and how I communicate. And it's that I have this fear that people won't think I'm competent. I want people to think that I'm competent, that I'm hardworking, that I'm likable. And I think that the fear that people won't perceive me in that way can lead to a lot of control, like trying to bring a lot of control into the way that I show up. And in that control, you just come out as a robot. You're just like, I've got to say exactly the right thing. I've got to do exactly the right thing. And you're controlling every element of how you show up. And what people get on the other end of that is this uncanny valley robot type experience that's just super technical. There's nothing personal going on there. There's nothing real happening there. And you can't feel anything about that. Like you can't feel connected to that. So that's what was happening.